Hey there, Kristin Jacobsen here. So here's a fun but sad fact for us. Most of the people that love our show are still not subscribed to our channel. Now, here is the deal that I'm going to make with you. If you can find it in your heart to click the subscribe button, I promise you that we're going to get better guests to provide more deeper insights and more practical steps in the online business M&A space. So that's the deal. If you can hit the subscribe button and also put on the notifications, we'd be really, really grateful for that. And we'll make a better show for you moving forward. Now, I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode.
Well, hello listeners, and thank you again for tuning in to another episode of the Digital Dealmakers podcast. It's lovely to have you, and Kristin and I have really enjoyed the community we've built over the last weeks and getting in all your questions. We certainly love answering them, and we really hope that you continue to get quality content and lessons learned from our insights and our guest insights. Well, today I'm super excited to have one of our leading M&A advisors at Flippa, Fiona Laidlaw. She's Australian originally, but she's lived in the US. She's currently living in Singapore and leading our advisory team out of Singapore. She's doing a fantastic job there. She's closed deals around the world, and she's actually exited herself. So I guess I'm the only one in the room that hasn't exited a business yet, which makes me feel a little insecure, but nonetheless, that's okay. But Fiona, thank you so much for your time. Before I say any more about yourself, please, give a brief introduction about, your journey in your career, right from the beginning to where you are today. And yeah, definitely I'll have some follow-up questions. Kristin as well, I'm sure.
Awesome. No, thank you guys for having me. Pleasure to be here. I'll give, just a little spiel. So like you said, I'm Aussie, so it's always great to talk to some fellow Aussies, none of us which are actually living in Australia, so I think that's pretty typical of Australians. But so I actually started my professional career as a business owner, so within the fitness world. When I was at college, everyone gets a job at a bar. That's not me. I'm a bit more health and wellness focused. So, established a fitness and health business, but decided to pack up and move to the US in 2016. So, I did exit that, and the deal was completely just revenue share on a set. We agreed on a set price, and then I got paid out as the acquirer got paid, and I literally sold to a friend. So my first introduction to M&A, not knowing a thing. So that was interesting.
Yeah, that's really cool though.
It worked out. It was great, and moved over to the US, where I moved into more of a sales role, and eventually started at Flippa after being there for a little bit. Moved back to Australia for 12 months, and now I'm leading the team here at Flippa in the Australia Pacific New Zealand region.
Yeah, I mean,
nice.
I'm super interested to know about the differences in culture, because I imagine going from Australia to the US, I mean, of course, there are some similarities, but also differences. But please tell me, I mean, I'm really interested to hear your perspective. Please tell me.
Yeah, so you're right. In Australia and the US, as you can imagine, there's some similarities. I love the Americans. I think they're so friendly. I mean, Aussie accent always helps. But everyone over there is super friendly. As far as business in Asia, it is very much built on a personal relationship, meeting someone over dinner, over coffee, and really building that personal relationship, versus in Australia and the US, when I was doing my business, we could jump on a Zoom call and you can wrap up a deal pretty quickly, just via Zoom calls or calls over the phone. But in Asia, the culture is really around meeting people and building that relationship, building that trust. in different areas of Asia. It's even more focused on that as well. Japan is known to be, very much you need to be able to shake someone's hand to get a deal done. So, it's actually, I prefer to do business that way, so it suits me. But it is interesting moving from different cultures.
That's very interesting, and that sort of brings up the point of like, when someone's looking to sell their online business, right? Like when you've got a global buyer pool, and I think Flippa is like more than 50% of the actual transactions are done across country. As a seller, really understanding what the cultural fit is for that particular buyer and working with them, because you do have to promote that business and actually work on the deal to get it done. So, and that's very much true for, Dom and I experience this a lot in the Europe region, where each country in Europe is very specific in terms of how they do deals. So having that expertise and that knowledge, it definitely goes a long way.
Yeah, I think, with different cultures in mind, right? So these soft skills and soft elements of a deal, which are super important. I think that then accentuates the need to make sure the hard elements of the deal are as smooth as possible. So for example, quality financials, being organized, etc. Fiona, in your experience and in the deals that you've closed, can you please give our listeners an overview, who are thinking to maybe sell, whether it be now or in 1 year or 2 years? What are some of the common mistakes that you see that your sellers have made previously before deciding to sell? I'm super interested to hear your lessons learned and what you know.
Yeah, so first off, I agree with you there, Dom. I think having done a lot of cross-border transactions, because the differences in culture comes into play, it is really important to have your foundations in order. And I think a couple of really important foundations that business owners need to have in order for a successful sale, and when they don't, it does typically lead to the deal not going through. Documentations all being in order. So when I talk about documentations, yes, I mean the financials and having your P&L, up to scratch and organized, tax documents and any verification of funds in order. But I also mean things such as contracts with suppliers and your SOPs and employment documents if that's necessary and things like that. So I think a lot of people tend to focus on just having their financials in order, but it extends beyond that, because if you don't have a contract with her supplier and that supplier is going to stop supplying next quarter. So that supplier actually is really important for her business because they supply 80% of what the revenue brings in. So the business, the valuation of that business is just going to tank. So that's an example of not just having your financial documents in order.
So it sounds like, ultimately, even if you are looking to sell or not looking to sell, like having these things organized and updated is just generally good business.
Yeah. From my view, and this is what I try to encourage my sellers or the sellers that are thinking to sell and talking to me beforehand, you're going to have to do it anyway, right? It's a net benefit. Even if you don't sell, having organized information about your business to help drive business decisions is a good thing. So, when I do get a bit of pushback from sellers on some of the documentation that I want them to have before a certain date, it's important for them to, and they do realize over time once they do it in retrospect that, had I known this while I was running the business, things would have been a lot easier. And it's kind of, keeping your room in order, your bedroom in order. No one likes cleaning your room, when you're younger, but you do it because it gives you clarity. It gives you, a good sense of well-being. It keeps everything organized. It means that you can find things faster when you need. So it's similar to running a business in a way. Like have your room in good order. Time comes when you need to sell or find out information about the business. It's readily available and accurate.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, you go, Fiona. Yep.
Yeah, I was just kind of going to elaborate on that, and I think that comes to the expectations on evaluation as well. If you don't have the business or the room in order, as Dom was kind of saying, you don't have an understanding depth enough to make an accurate expectation on your valuation. You're guessing based on a bias opinion, right? Like, you're always going to think your baby is the best looking in the room, or your business is the best, right? Because you've put the heart and soul into it. But if you've got your documents ready, you've got your financials in order, you have the facts that then you can either back up exactly what I was thinking and maybe I'm not being realistic, and you're just going to have a better expectation and more realistic expectation around your valuation.
Absolutely.
100%.
I mean, the number of times that I've spoken to sellers and, gone through the financials and, for the first time they discover, what their advertising costs over sales are, or, what their net profit margin really is. That's a good exercise to go through if you haven't done that already. But yeah, in saying that too, as a business, going through that, like, it's not really the focus of business owners generally, but so I'm guessing there are ways to, even if you don't want to do it, having someone in the business or a third party helping you actually get that in order. So Fiona, is there like usually sort of like recommendations for people that, know that it's important, but don't actually want to, go through and do all of it themselves because they're just not wired that way? Like, for example, the financials and bookkeeping, like, what do you generally recommend for those sellers?
Yeah, I mean, I was not wired like that, right? I was pretty much just as long as the money was cleared in my account, I was good, but definitely not wired to do that. So I think something that is done really well here in Asia is the community among business owners. And I know it's done really well in other regions of the world, Europe in particular as well. But there's particular groups where business owners will get together, they will socialize and network, and but also there's WhatsApp groups where they'll connect and say, hey, what's the best accounting software that I can use for this, and this, or who has a recommendation on this? And I think using people within your network who have either gone through it before or seeking advice of someone like, not necessarily an M&A advisor, right? But someone that is a professional is really important as well. And when it does come to sell, I think one of the biggest mistakes people do make is not seeking advice. It would be like, I would never sell a house without a real estate agent, right? I think,
of course.
I think selling a business without a M&A broker or advisor is something I did, and I mean, it worked out in the end for me, but I don't think I got the best deal, right?
Yeah, well, similar to what you said, Fiona, I went through the process of selling the business myself. And that was probably the hardest thing that I've ever done in business. And if I was to do this again, even knowing what I know, I'm going to outsource it. I'm definitely not doing it myself. So, yeah, but in general, like, things like you're having one sort of business that comes to mind is Ecom Balance, right? They specialize in e-commerce and FBA type bookkeeping services, right? And so they know how to get those things set up, and you're going to be spending a lot of time and making a lot more mistakes than it's going to cost you to actually just get it done by someone like that who's a specialist. And then using M&A advisors' expertise to sort of assist with getting these things together.
Yeah, for sure. I think reaching out to an M&A advisor to understand what it is that's needed for a sale, and then there's such a huge network of resources now. I think it's asking people that are in a similar position to you what worked for them, and going from there.
For our listeners, Fiona, I'm sure they'd love to hear about what your process is and how you typically handle a sale. What are the steps? We've covered it in a podcast before about the M&A process. Now, obviously, generally there are the same steps, but every advisor has their own style. So I'm really curious to hear about your style. You know, when someone approaches you and they're thinking about selling, you know, what is the process from the beginning right through to the end? Love to hear that.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, I'm sure you've kind of given the steps on, hey, this is 1 through X. The thing that I really focus on is identifying, you know, or learning about the business, right? So if someone approaches me, I'm going to sit down with them for a significant amount of time and understand the business, because how can I sell something I don't know anything about? You know, it's back to that real estate analogy. It's you can't sell a house without going through it and understanding what features stand out and what don't. So, you know, I tend to spend quite a bit of time understanding what the business is, you know, who the customers are, what geographic location, all that sort of stuff, and really understand the ins and outs of the business. I do that for 2 reasons. One is, am I the right person to sell this? I focus on businesses that are online. I focus within a specific, you know, range of valuation, so $1 million to $50 million. So that's what I'm best at, and that's the buyer pool that I have. So I'll always be honest with people on, hey, I can sell this or I can't. And then, understanding the business, what it does, and who the customers are and things like that. And that's important because once we do have the listing set up, I'm going to go hunt for buyers. So if I can understand who the customer base is, then we can look at a strategic buyer. So for example, I sold a business that the customers were large enterprises as well that are looking for talent to do their advertising and modeling and things like that. And the buyer that I was able to hunt down and find actually understood. He has the largest supplement brand in Hong Kong. He understood the need for this particular business, and so that was a strategic buy for him because he, you know, it solved one of his problems. So by understanding the business in and out, you can then identify buyers, qualify those buyers, and, you know, introduce them to the business, the data room, make sure that they understand the business enough to then jump on a call with the seller, and I will then negotiate and close.
Yeah, just to stop you at data room, in case people don't know. So what do you typically have in the data room that you'll share with buyers? Because some people might think, is it a literal room? Like, tell us about it.
No, so data room is basically just a folder that I will set up with your financial information and verification, traffic and customer information verification. And when I talk about this sort of stuff, you know, I've talked about customers, I've talked about suppliers, it's all IP that can be taken, so we anonymize all that. And demos, I love to put them in the data room as well. But it's basically the information that's going to help a qualified buyer
make a decision,
understand if the business.
Okay, so P&L, customer information anonymized, demographics, website traffic, other key metrics, such like if it's SaaS, it's probably like churn rate, CAC, LTV. A funny story about data rooms, I joked about a physical room. So it's ridiculous, but I remember one of my old partners telling me, like, let's say 30, 40 years ago, literally it would be a physical room, you know, before internet and cloud and everything. And he said you would have boxes with folders of information in there, and then you had a set amount of time that you could walk in, review the information, write it down, skim it, highlight. You couldn't even highlight. What am I talking about? How insane is that? Like, times have just changed crazy. I don't even think I could have the attention span, or I don't think I'd be fast enough, to be honest, to be in there for 2 or 3 hours and then find all the information that you need to. Like, I'm sure, but you're used to it when you're growing up in that environment. But it's quite funny to hear how it used to be back in the day.
I'm imagining like those rooms where they, in the police like shows where they pull out the boxes of old cases.
Law and Order SVU. Yeah.
Interestingly enough, like when we talk about physical files, like one of the due diligence processes was to actually provide the physical files to the business that I was, selling the finance business to. And I gave them basically didn't have it, right? But they required it. So I basically just printed about $5,000 worth of documents and gave it to them.
Wow.
But I was going to say, we've gone from that to, maybe in the future, in the not so distant future, we'll have like a metaverse deal room where you can look around on your those Apple Vision Pro things.
I mean, maybe
you wouldn't have been able to. I was going to say you wouldn't have been able to do a US to Australia transaction, or it would have taken a really long time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Accessibility.
Yeah, absolutely.
Accessibility is just crazy. I mean, we don't like talking too much about Flippa. Obviously, we love it, and it is a great platform for people to close deals on there. But 70% of Flippa's deals are cross-border transactions. So, I mean, that's an example of technology. Yeah, exactly. Imagine only being siloed into domestic deals. So that's super interesting. I mean, who knows? Our kids in 20 years' time or whatever will probably be laughing at us that we use Google Drive or Deal Room or different types of providers.
They'll be doing deals in 5 days, 3 months.
There will be robots that can read everything crazy. Probably, and
it's probably already happening. But
It's probably not even 20 years away. It's 5 years away. But yeah.
I was going to say, Fiona, so, we've talked about one major mistake that sellers make in terms of looking to sell their businesses, generally just not having the business packaged up in a way that can be easily presented to a buyer where they can make a decision relatively quickly. Let's say that all of that information is ready, the deal room, whether it's physical or virtual, is prepped up. What are some of the other common mistakes that you see sellers make that effectively just tanks a deal or loses their possibility of even really getting a decent deal?
Yeah, I think another one that I think is super important, and it kind of goes hand in hand with the getting advisory and representation piece, is not knowing the different deal structures or not being flexible on them. So, I mean, the amount of people that I've spoken to that say, I want $3 million cash up front, closed within, 14 days. The market at the minute doesn't represent that. Like, maybe it did in 20 for your type of business, but it just, with the interest rate hikes, with loss of confidence among, the economy, with, all the geopolitical madness that's going on, the market will not bring a deal structure like that. Typically, just as I say that, I'm thinking of a verbal offer I got today, actually, for a cash offer. But I think just having someone to speak to or educating yourself on the different deal structures of, what seller financing, does the market dictate 80% seller financing, or does it dictate 30% seller financing, and what are the risks associated with that? I think there's a bit of buzz around buyers at the moment of offering 100% seller financing. I personally wouldn't advise that for anyone that I'm working with, just because of the risks associated with that. So I think having the representation does help you not only consider other types of deal structures that the market dictates at the moment, but it also helps protect you against being taken advantage of with those type of deal structures. I think also understanding things like earnouts and what the difference is from seller financing and stuff like that. So yeah, having those go hand in hand of being flexible on the deal structure based on the market, because that does change, but also having the representation to then protect you and the risks associated with those different deal structures.
Got it. So, basically, if I'm understanding this correctly, like firstly, rather than, expecting the market to meet your demands and what you want, actually being realistic and understanding what the market's willing to offer, or, generally speaking, because, ultimately it's all kind of based on, what we experience, but, until it's on the market in front of buyers, we don't really know. So that, and then second part is, having a third party and an expert in this particular field that also can bring multiple options to the table versus, you just, you versus, for example, an e-com aggregator. And if it's a one-on-one battle and you got no options behind that, they've played that game multiple times, more than you have. So, whereas if you've got someone in your team that has done deals multiple times as well, they know how to play the game better than you might be able to. So,
Yeah.
just a good point you brought up.
I would never go into a fight with no one in my corner. It just doesn't make sense.
Especially when you're up against these private equity backed aggregators or SaaS acquirers, or, I mean, a lot of them obviously have good hearts, and I know a lot of them quite well. But obviously they're in it for themselves, and they're in it to get the best deal for themselves. So it makes sense that if you're a seller, you're obviously going to have someone that represents you, that has, your interests at heart.
Well, it's either that or you use what we call the FAFO method. And I won't explain what the FAFO method stands out for, but it's F around and find out. Right, so you can try and do it yourself. Yeah, FAFO.
The podcast is PG rated.
F around and find out.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, everyone's good until they prove themselves not. Everyone's got good intentions, but at the end of the day, if I'm in a private equity position or if I'm in a buying position, I'm going to do what's in my best interest or anything else.
Well, on the flip side to that, we've been talking about some of the mistakes that sellers make, but obviously, there would be mistakes that buyers make in terms of getting a deal done. So could you elaborate more on sort of what some of the common mistakes that buyers make that, could have been a good deal for them, but then they end up tanking it?
Yeah, I think the one I see most is time and lack of communication. So I'm sure Dom has maybe said this before, but time kills all deals, So if a buyer if they're taking too long on making an assessment or doing their due diligence and not communicating that with the seller, it's going to cause a lot of issues because, I know, Kristin, you've been through this process before and Dom's worked with sellers. It's so emotional, it's so stressful that they're not being communicated, hey, we're still working through due diligence, or, I'm traveling this week, so I will be out of reach, but I'll connect with you next week. Just the buyers being able to have those touch points and communicate with the seller eases that anxiety, eases their want to go find other buyers, take that time and that lack of a lot of the deals, and of course creates, just anxiety and stress where they're really, it can be avoided. And then another thing that I think, particularly at the moment, there seems to be this thought process that there's no competition in the market. And yes, while the market is slowed down compared to where it was at its peak, 2021, 2020, there's still money out there. There's still good buyers. There's still people wanting to buy businesses. So, the competition is still high, and by taking too long, they're going to lose out.
I think a common, and thanks Fiona, that I agree completely as well. I think for me, a pet hate that I have with a lot of buyers is when they fail to understand the business and the product. I have so many conversations with buyers that waste their own time, by the way, but also my time. I try and protect the seller from wasting their time, but because I don't usually get them involved at that point. But the amount of buyers that simply look at a business based on its P&L and financials and that's it. Like, I get it. I have an accounting background, finance background. I understand that the numbers need to work out. But you also need to know a bit about the business. And I think buyers can sometimes make the mistake of getting into a call, introduction call, and just going straight into the numbers. No foreplay, no understanding of what the business does, no stroking of the ego of the seller about the product. It can really turn off the seller. I've been in deals where the seller has just said, you know what, Dom, nah, gut feeling isn't right. Don't want to sell to this person, because they're just purely focused on the financials. And it makes sense, because there are countless times where you go through deals where the buyer is clearly interested because of it financially, but there also needs to be an element of alignment with the product itself and with the business itself and what it does. I think they're the most seamless and smooth transactions, where you've got a buyer that has a genuine passion and genuine interest outside of the financials. Obviously, the financials are a core component. And I think that that's really important to display from the beginning when you're having your first conversation with a buyer. So if I'm a buyer, that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to build a rapport with the seller already as a point of differentiation from, other buyers out there. The second thing is to make sure, after building rapport, is to show them your vision. Sellers are often, especially, small market M&A, sellers have built this business from nothing. It's their baby.
They want to see it flourish after, usually.
Exactly. They bootstrapped it. You don't have to share the details exactly point by point how you plan to scale the business, but definitely show what your intentions are, and definitely, make the seller understand and feel like what they've built is something great, but you're going to make it fantastic. It's really, I think, two of the key things that I often see buyers don't do, which I would do personally.
Yeah, I mean, it's a marriage, right? And like the buyers and sellers are going to be working together throughout this process and throughout the transition and potentially afterwards, depending on the deal. So it's marrying together two sides of, one business, really.
Yeah.
Fiona, I've got a follow-up question on this. Like, how common is it for buyers to, really actually understand why the seller is looking to sell and being able to sort of match their offer and how they deal with the process to really get the outcome for the seller? Because it's not always going to be about like top dollar. It's as Dominic said, sometimes they just want to move on to another project. They've built this, they've got to a certain point, they've hit a ceiling as to the growth of it. And so, they want to sell the business to someone where they can see that success continue even further as more of a pride thing. So, because I've gone to, and I've talked to a lot of sort of VC and like aggregator type acquirers, and I think maybe one time that sort of has been brought up, but otherwise it's very quantitative in that sense. So, I'd like to get your perspective on how you see that.
Yeah, so I've been super fortunate with my buyers, and I do believe it's because I've spent time on that front end learning more about the business, learning the story. Like, the first question I ask a seller is, what's the story behind this business? Because there is a story with every business. There's a reason why they chose that particular business. Maybe once I've heard, hey, it's because I can make a lot of money. Like, it's never really that. So every time I talk to a buyer and when I'm qualifying it, I'll tell them that story and why the person is selling, because if they can understand the motivation for a seller to sell, and you're right, it's honestly, I would probably say 80% of the time not the price point. It's about, hey, I've got a kid and I want to spend time with that kid, not 16-hour days on this SaaS business, or I've got a sick parent and I have to take care of them and stuff like that. So it is, in one case, it might be the most important thing is getting their money within a certain amount of time so they can then go and invest it in something else. In other times, it's, hey, I just need the quickness of getting out of this business so I can attend to the next thing. So I think understanding that motivation helps with the creative deal structure we were talking about before, because as a buyer, maybe your deal structure doesn't have to, it's not all cash up, but if we understand the motivation of the seller, we can get creative with that deal structure to make sure that both sides win, with the most important part of the deal structure for that seller, being the motivating driver of getting the deal done.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it changes the potential of whether or not it's even going to be possible, right? Mm-hmm. So, for example, like if someone doesn't want to continue on with the business and they're literally wanting to just free up time and have a clean break, that changes the potential deal structure to maybe a performance-based earnout where they'll need to continue consulting and working with the buyer. That's just not going to match, right? So yeah, it's interesting you bring that up.
Yeah, so that's some really good insights there, Fiona. Thank you for that. Now, I guess as we wrap up, I'm really curious. The last question from my side, and I have my own view, but I'm curious about your view, of course. When do you think it's appropriate for a seller to start thinking about exiting or even having a...
Yeah, so, exiting may be a scary kind of concept for someone, or something that they think, hey, I don't want to even think about that. But in my experience, life changes really quickly. So I've met sellers that have had to, they've been forced to exit and they're not quite as prepared as what they could be. And I've met some that have been thinking about exits right from the time they founded the business. I believe if you're looking for the best valuation and the best transition, you need to start thinking about the exit as soon as possible and start talking to people, whether that's, additional resources to grow the business to get to the number you want, or advisors on, hey, what does the process actually look like, or where's the market at the minute, and when's the best time to exit. Having those conversations early is just going to prepare you to make the best decision on the timing of the exit and how to exit to get the best valuation. The worst thing that can happen is that you are forced to exit a business and you are not ready with all the documentation and things I mentioned earlier, or you don't know the market or anything like that, and you don't have the information and you're forced to exit. That's a worst case scenario. So you'll end up getting the best valuation.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, in that sense, like, I think a lot of people might sort of believe that you can only really start engaging with an advisor when you're ready to sell. But I mean, ultimately, we can have a conversation now, even if that means that it's a 12-month timeline or even a 24-month timeline. We've got the resources and the capacity to be able to have those conversations. Now, obviously we're not going to work with you every week for 12 months, but, we can provide you with some value to start with, and then, have someone in your corner when the time does come. So, don't hesitate to reach out to any of us on this podcast if you are thinking about potentially selling, or it could be on the horizon at some point in the future.
Yeah.
And so with that wrapping up, where can people, where's the best place to connect with you, Fiona?
Yeah, LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, WhatsApp, email. They're my best channels for sure.
So thank you so much, Fiona, for jumping on and dropping some gems in this podcast episode. So, really appreciate you jumping on. And, for those who are looking to potentially sell and, want to start looking at, how the process works, or get a valuation estimate, or, what the possible options could look like, feel free to reach out to Fiona. And really appreciate you jumping on and listening to the episode. And we'll look forward to connecting again really soon.
Thank you both.
Thanks, Fiona.